Hi, I'm Richard Lang. Welcome to AEROPS. Today we have a very special gentleman we're going to interview from the New Paradigm Institute. His name is Kevin Wright, and he's the Public Relations Director. And he's going to talk to us about what's going on in Washington, D.C. with UAPs today. Aerospace Research Operations is an organization that's domiciled in Virginia and registered with the State Corporation Commission, also known by the acronym AEROPS, which is a scientific research cooperative that's focused on unidentified anomalous phenomena and the associated high strangeness and paranormal effects that typically result after an encounter. Kevin Wright has 25 years of experience in Washington, D.C. with public relations, communications, and issue advocacy. He founded the Solve Advocacy and Issue Advocacy Communications consulting firm dedicated to UAP and edge sciences issues. He's a press and media consultant to the New Paradigm Institute, and currently he's a weekly columnist for the Roswell Daily Record. Okay, so maybe if you could just start out a little bit, Kevin, and talk about kind of how it started and what their operating objectives were.
Sure. So the New Paradigm Institute is sort of an auxiliary of the Romero Institute, based in Santa Cruz, California. And the New Paradigm Institute was set up specifically for advocating for disclosure of what various departments and agencies of the executive branch know and have learned about, the UAP phenomena over the course of the last 70 to 80 years. Phase that the institute would move into to help educate people about the subject and move it along. But this started essentially last late summer, early fall of 2023, and the first area of focus was really National Defense Authorization Act
Right.
and the UAP Disclosure Act, which was an amendment that was bipartisan amendment that was offered then by then Majority Leader Chuck Schumer
Right.
and Mike Rounds, Marco Rubio, Martin Heinrich, Kirsten Gillibrand, and some others. And this would have set in place a mechanism for the eventual disclosure of these secrets that have been kept from the public and from Congress for far too long. It was an astounding piece of legislation. It was 64 pages talking about non-human intelligence, UAP, UFOs,
Yeah.
biologics, etc. So that was our first area of focus. Unfortunately, of course, that amendment did not go through when the House and Senate went to conference committee to, hammer out the details of the competing NDAs that passed both the House and Senate. And in the conference report, most of that was stripped out, but they did leave in one crucial aspect, which was setting up UAP records collection at the National Archives. And that set forth a deadline, which has now come and passed, which would have been, I think it was September 30th or October 20th. I don't remember which one it was, in this past year, 2024, for departments and agencies of the executive branch to turn over, records that were responsive,
Right.
to the UAP phenomenon. They've extended that now to September 30th, I think 2025. So,
Now,
another.
let me ask you. So originally they tried to pass that and it got shot down by a couple of votes.
Well, I mean, there was no vote. I mean,
Okay.
so when they go to conference committee,
Yeah. Tell me
the
how that
House and
works.
Senate, the House and Senate will assign conferees, they're members of Congress, and they'll go into
Mhm.
a room, essentially hammer out the competing bills and decide, what gets included and what doesn't get included. Um, and so most of the UAPDA
Okay.
did not get included. And then when that conference committee issues the conference report, that is ultimately what the House and Senate will vote on as a final package for the NDA.
So do we think we still have a shot at getting that part of that stuff where they were talking about, making the corporations that have wreckage and non-human biological stuff to turn it over to Congress? So there's probably still a chance of that getting passed at some point, you think?
Well, I mean, they tried again, not quite as hard, but they did try again this past year in 2024.
Right.
There was an amendment offered in the Senate. It did not get included in the package of amendments that got attached to the NDAA for fiscal year 2025. So there was no debate about it in the conference committee, this past fall. So when the NDA passed in December of 2024, there was very little UAP, connotations or
Gotcha.
aspects to the legislation whatsoever. But we've come to understand that Mike Rounds does intend to offer the UAPDA again in this new legislative session.
Good.
Um, Whether that will include, word for word every aspect of, what was contained in it in 2023 or 2024, really remains to be seen.
Cool. Now, tell me, Danny Sheehan is like the principal person and the founder of NPI, right?
That's correct.
And you guys have a pretty strong, he's an attorney, and you guys have a lot of litigation or lawyers that you have at your disposal to help work on these projects, which is huge, I think.
Yeah, so I mean, NPI is involved in several different capacities on this disclosure front. Danny is working diligently on legal components and aspects as well as drafting some legislation. We do have a enhanced UAP whistleblower protection legislation
Oh,
that
yeah.
we've talked to members of Congress about. We'll see where that goes, but we've engaged with a couple of members of Congress, personally, as well as their staffs on in a few other offices, and we're going to see, who it is that can be, essentially the champion for this legislation.
See, when you talk about whistleblower protection, I think a lot of people might not understand, but some of these people that have come forward and testified, like David Gresh and Lou Elizondo, they're risking their personal safety because apparently they're getting a lot of threats and that kind of thing. And hopefully that legislation will be able to facilitate some kind of protection from people that come forward. That's basically it, I think.
Yeah, so yeah, absolutely. I mean, this is a very strong piece of legislation. It incorporates many components of different portions of statute that are already in existence and amends them. So it is also complicated legislation because it is, far-reaching and has quite a lot of breadth to it. But yes, the ultimate goal would be to protect people that want to come forward, with information regarding UAP, whether that's, strictly within, the government realm or also, private defense contractors or others that may, have knowledge of this.
What do you think? Have you been, I don't know if you've been watching any of the podcasts that Ross Coulhart's been doing about the guys, that have been actually working on recovery teams and stuff like that. I think I was curious what you think about it. I mean, this is stuff that the people in our world have known about for a long time, but it was really interesting and refreshing that they're starting to talk about it publicly and put it out on podcasts where a couple million people are listening to it.
Yeah, well, it is refreshing because, like you said, people that have, investigated or have done research or been involved in ufology for years or decades, have working knowledge of, how this sort of is supposed to work. And this is really sort of one of the very few people to come forward. You're referencing Jake Barber,
Yeah.
who was on the News Nation special, and then some follow-up, podcasts with his Skywatcher program. So it is refreshing to have somebody of the caliber of Jake Barber to come forward and talk about his experience. So
And also all the other guys that work with him have verified,
yeah,
which is huge. It really just helped the credibility of it.
yes, absolutely. And all these people appear to be of high caliber, credentialed people. These are the type of people that we've been wanting to come forward. And so hopefully, as we talk to members of Congress, they'll take them more seriously, and hopefully eventually have another hearing and potentially call a Jake Barber to come and testify about their experience.
So, Kevin, you remember last year you and I were at the SCU conference and we talked a little bit, and Ross Coulthart was there and he spoke at the meeting. He was the key speaker. And one of the things that he talked about, a lot of people have been asking lately, is like, why is the media so avoiding all this? And, why don't they do more? And what's going on with that? And I was really excited about what he said. The social media platforms have taken over and become so powerful now that I think he mentioned he had done an interview with Gary Nolan, and after they aired it, 3.2 million people watched the interview. And I was thinking
Right,
the last time 3.2 million people watched a network production was when Walter Cronkite told everybody Kennedy was assassinated.
right.
So I think that the media, it seems like they're losing a lot of ground, And some of these social media platforms, these podcasts, if you will, are really picking up the slack and really gaining the public trust in what's going on.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think the reason for the lack of so-called mainstream media doing their job in this is probably multifaceted. And one component is, of course, the stigma that has existed around UFOs, for decades. It makes it a bit more difficult for them to try to tackle the subject in a serious way, or at least that's the way they feel about it. There's also what Ross referred to as the drip. You get journalists and reporters and investigative journalists who have access to, high-ranking officials inside the Department of Defense and other agencies and departments, and they're fearful of, writing or reporting on a story that their sources will not like, and then they will no longer get like that drip of
Exactly.
information,
Yeah. Yeah.
and then there's also, a component to this that is, simply government disinformation and feeding, media organizations
Yeah.
purposefully incorrect information. There's, a good example of that was before, the All-Domain Anomaly Resolution Office issued their volume 1 of their historic report on government, dealings with
Right. Right.
UAP, and they had, an off-the-record sort of, meeting with some journalists prior to its release to sort of program them on what to say.
But it was a
So
select group of people that would
very
do what they
select group
would.
of
Yeah.
people who were, already predispositioned to report favorably for whatever it is that, the government wants them to report. So there's aspects of that as well. So it's multifaceted, but it's absolutely true. The mainstream media is not doing its job. And it's now up to, enterprising, YouTube podcasters, and journalists, independent journalists and others to, write and report on these stories and dig up the information that the mainstream media simply refuses to do.
Well, I can tell you, um, I had an occasion a couple of months ago to be with one of the top network, news. I don't want to call him a talking head, but you know what I'm talking about. Nightly
Yeah.
news, the guy's on the news every night. And I'm not going to say who it is, but I spent a couple hours with him, and I started talking to him about my books and all the things that are going on with the UFOs and the legislation and Congress. He said, "You know something, Richard?" He goes, "None of this has ever come across my desk." He said, "I have never, ever had anybody, see, he's got a team. They've got a team of people, and
Right.
they come in the morning and they're research guys. Okay, here's what we're going to talk about today. Here's the hot points and blah, 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 blah." He goes, none of this stuff about UAPs has ever come across my desk. And I thought that was really interesting. Someone of his caliber that's on nightly, again, nightly news that would say that. And he was serious. I mean, he wasn't screwing around with me, but he seemed like really surprised about all the stuff I was telling him. So that sort of tells
Well,
you it's a big machine.
yeah, and I think, um, it's very much the case with, lots of people that they're not paying attention. They don't know anything about what's going on. And I give you some perfect examples of that. I mean, we have members of Congress who you walk into their office and they have absolutely no clue what you're talking about. Even some members of Congress, they get asked a question by, a Matt Laszlo, from Ask a Poll UAP, when they're, going underneath the Capitol and going back to their House or Senate office buildings, and they get asked a question about, the UAP Disclosure Act, or they get asked a question about, the testimony of David Grush or something, and sometimes even ones that you'd think would should know what's going on because they're on House Oversight or Senate Intelligence or something, and they, seem like
Unbelievable.
they don't have any idea what. Part of the work that I'm engaged with New Paradigm Institute,
Right.
is going to as many offices as we can and just starting dialogues with, the staff, to begin with, to make them aware that, that this is a real issue, that this is something that's going on, and try to, make it germane to their office and their member. Not all members are on armed services or intelligence, or oversight. They might be on transportation. And so, a good way to talk to, a member of Congress that's on transportation committee, for example, would be to say, look, when the Office of the Director of National Intelligence issued their report in June 2021, they admitted that UAP is a flight safety risk. If you are a member of transportation committee, you have, certain jurisdictions over, air travel and things like that. This is something you should
Mhm.
probably be paying more attention to. If you're on energy committee or something, you probably want to know that whatever it is that, powers or allegedly powers these objects, might be representative of something that, may be, zero point energy or some other
Right.
form of energy that, we could replace fossil fuels with. So, you try to figure out ways of introducing the subject to different members of Congress and their staff and make it, germane and personal to what their interests and their responsibilities are.
In one of my books, I quoted Chris Mellon when he talked about disclosure and what they characterize as like a catastrophic disclosure.
Mhm.
And I think the plan has been they know that that those who have control of this information, if you will, and I don't think it's like the president of the United States, for example, but it's a group of individuals that they call them sometimes a shadow government, but their plan, I think, is to disclose this over a period of time because they know that with the internet and all the power and people like us, sooner or later they're going to get caught. I think one of the things a lot of people miss when we're talking about disclosure is the economic impact of it, the financial part of it. And people say, well, how could disclosure, cause my stocks to go down? Well, the reality is that, we wrote about kind of the history of how this all started. And it really did start back in the Truman administration when they started to recover crash wreckage. And Truman's like, wait a minute, these, whoever they are, they're hundreds of years ahead of us technology wise. So we need to study this and, use it for our military applications and that kind of thing. And so basically they closed the door on this stuff back then in the 40s and all of these the crash wreckage that's been recovered has been distributed out to these different corporations, technology companies, and now some of them are the defense contractors. And by the time Eisenhower was ready to leave office, they basically went renegade on the government, wouldn't tell them what's going on anymore. And that's why when Eisenhower, in his farewell speech, he said, "Beware of the military-industrial complex because of the misplaced power." So
Right.
fast forward to today, and these corporations, companies, they're making trillions of dollars on this technology. When I did the research on it for my book, some of the companies that got wreckage, like for example, the first fiber optic tubing that was recovered in a saucer type crash was given to Bell Laboratories, and of course now half the world's wired together with fiber optic tubing for internet service. So that's kind of how it happened. The same thing with the microchip technology. So I think one of the, as far as I'm concerned, I'm more afraid of those guys than I am of the ETs, the non-human entities. And I think part of it just has to do with no offense intended to anyone there, but part of it is when the reality comes out about the technology that's been developed and available, it's going to cause a huge economic recession. And the reason for that, the only way I can explain it is if you had if I came to lunch with you and I said I put a briefcase down on the table and said, "Hey Kevin, what's inside this briefcase will generate enough electric power to power you know every house within a 200-mile radius of this table, and it'll run for 100 years without any renewable energy sources, and it won't put out any pollution." What do you think that would do to the economy? And I was actually faced with that question back in the late 90s, and the answer was, well, back then our economy was predominated by the petroleum industry, the energy sector, and that we're talking about 0 point energy, and that would put them out of business basically. So
Right.
that's the impact you're going to have is you start introducing all this really unbelievable technology that's from out of this world, if you will. And a lot of the company, basically the energy sector, they're not in any hurry for you to get this until they sell you the rest of the coal and the oil they have, the commodities, you see. So
Right.
I think that's part of the problem that they're wrestling with disclosure is how it's going to impact the the economy, if that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you're 100% right that if we don't know, but if there is something like a 0 point energy or something, and just suddenly that became known, and we've had this technology for years or decades, the financial ramifications are probably incalculable because you're talking about entire countries that are dependent upon selling oil like Saudi Arabia and other Middle Eastern countries. And then you also have the geopolitical fallout of how many other countries or peoples of the world would be absolutely outraged to know that the United States or other countries, Russia, China, knew about, such a thing as, 0 point energy or had access
Right,
to
right.
something like it. The geopolitical fallout could be enormous as well.
Yeah.
So it's sort of a double, it's a two-pronged thing in that scenario, but it goes beyond just oil and energy. It encompasses pretty probably no aspect of life would go untouched.
Right.
Take medical insurance, for example. Suddenly insurance companies would probably have to start figuring out ways to cover, um, you know, health impacts from close proximity to a UAP and you get radiation burn or something like that.
Microwave,
Um,
yeah.
yeah, I mean, you'd have
Or
to start
magnetic
going down all
energy,
these
sorry.
different holes and really start to game plan out how far and wide reaching the financial implications of this would be. And so that's part of the thing with disclosure is also trying to figure out what the ramifications of disclosure are so you can plan accordingly for it. But of course, you and I sitting here would have a very difficult time trying to game plan out what the ramifications are because we don't know exactly what the answers are. So it's
That's
very
true.
difficult then to, think what all the ramifications are and then plan how to, deal with those ramifications, in a proper way that has minimal disruption or damage to, society, countries, the world over. So, it's a very complex, difficult issue.
Well, and the other thing too is, I've heard people say that they're worried about, like we basically have this huge bundle of information that we're sitting on. Well, you have to think that the Russians and the Chinese are doing their fair share of research too. What if they jump in front of us and take the spotlight and disclose it to the world first? It's going to make us look, like we got caught with our pants down. So
Well,
that's
not just
another fact. Good.
Yeah, well, I mean, it could certainly make us look like we got caught with our pants down, make, the trillions of dollars that we've spent on defense and intelligence, say where'd all that money go that you didn't know this was going on. But of course, they did know it was going on. So it's not just an embarrassment, but it's also forces a uncontrolled disclosure of some sort in which the government then has to suddenly come clean and say, yeah, the Chinese didn't discover this, we did. We've known this for 80 years. So it's a
And they're going to say,
very
why didn't you tell us then? That's the problem.
that's right. That's right. So it's a very, tricky situation. And that's why, people like Carl Nell have said, we really need something like the UAPDA to pass to prevent this sort of catastrophic disclosure, whether that's China or something else happens that forces it, into the light of day. Throwing all your chips on the table at once probably isn't the best, idea. So, this is something that should um, compel people inside government and inside private defense contractors and others
Yeah, exactly.
to, come forward and say, yeah, this is true. We've had this, and figure out a way to tell, the American public, what's really been going on.
Well, as far as the technologies that are undisclosed, in my time working on some of the projects where we investigated UAPs and looked at databases, there's a certain type of a craft that would show up frequently in the reports. It's like a triangle craft. It's got a little white light in each corner and a red light on the bottom. And most of us have been around for a long time know that that's a an alien reproduction vehicle. It's basically a man-made vehicle, and it clearly is very. I mean, it's works on an anti-gravity propulsion system that most of us think they've had for 15 years or so. And there's some companies that make, like for example, Lockheed Martin is one of the companies that owns those and makes them. But I didn't say that, but
Right. Well, I mean, yeah, that all goes into, the trouble with disclosure of, not only do we know that there's an NHI, that UAP are real, we've collected their retrievals or their gifts, whatever you want to call them.
right.
We've been reverse engineering and all the stuff that has been, rumored about that, haven't been able to make any progress on it is also a lie. And, we do actually have vehicles that we have produced based on, the technology and the science and things. But then it also gets into, sequestered
Yeah.
math, physics that have been hidden away by the Atomic Energy Act and acts of the executive branch. It also goes into, you know, the um, the Invention Secrecy Act of, people coming up with ideas for technology and the government saying, that's really great, but we're not going to let anybody know about it. We're gonna, we're gonna take that patent from you and we're gonna hide it, from people, all based on, under the guise of national security,
Right. They
as well
classify the
intentioned.
information and then it's locked in the patent office where you can't get
Right.
it.
And it's like when Mark Andreessen, talked last summer about going to the Biden White House and, talking about AI and, that, they were told essentially that, after the Cold War that they, you know, um, secretized, areas of physics and math, surrounding nuclear energy and nuclear weapons, and that they're fully willing to do so again around physics and math around AI. And so this is an ongoing thing. It's not just UAP and stuff. It's a far wider encompassing way in which the executive branch, is essentially hiding physics and math from the world.
Yeah,
And that could include
technology.
also
Yeah. Yeah.
technology and anti-gravitic, technology and things. And that's, certainly seems to be the case.
Well, one of the things that I've noticed, and I'm not, if from where I'm sitting, if I'm seeing it, a lot of other people probably are too, but it seems, and it's always been that way, that UAP activity has typically always been around nuclear facilities, whether it's nuclear weapons storage facilities or air bases where they've got a bunch of nuclear missiles on airplanes, even some around nuclear reactors and that kind of thing. And so I think you can probably deduce that the non-human intelligence, if you will, is interested in that our nuclear energy and our capabilities in that regard. And we've all seen the stories, the guys talking about being out west in the missile silos, and they're in the control room, and something comes, the guys down in the control room, the security people up on the surface, they're calling them, going, "Hey, there's a huge UFO over the field." And the next thing you know, all the nuclear missiles start shutting down one at a time until they're all turned off.
Right.
And that's happened more than one or five times. And so it's obvious that they do have technology where they can control them if they need to. And
Yeah.
so
The SCU conference we were talking at last summer in June,
yep,
Sunday the Coalition for UAP Studies has put together several studies related to sightings of UAP around the post World War II, atomic warfare assets of the United States, going from, from the mining of uranium to its processing to the production of the nuclear warhead pits to, assembling of ICBMs and putting them into silos. Every step of the way, there were these sightings as though the UAP were intensely
watching.
interested in what was going on. The question really becomes not were they watching, but why were they watching? What is their intention? Are they just curious? It's above my pay grade because I simply don't have enough information to say what the intention is, but certainly hope that people inside the intelligence community and the Department of Defense have done their due diligence and have a better idea of what their intentions are. It's like it was the May 2022 hearing if you recall, that they had Ronald Moultrie and Scott Bray, and I don't remember which member of Congress it was. I think it might have been Mike Gallagher asked about UAP around nuclear assets, and both Bray and Moultrie feigned any knowledge of it whatsoever and shrugged their
Yeah,
shoulders
right.
and said, I don't know anything about it. I mean, maybe they didn't, but I find that highly unlikely. They just weren't prepared to talk about it because they hadn't, gone over their talking points ahead of time.
Yeah. Well, I think that the and of course, I went to college in the 70s and I've got a degree in aeronautics, but the physics back then and what we know is like as far as quantum mechanics and quantum physics now is just unbelievable the advances. But the quantum physicists will tell you that if you detonate a nuclear device, that the effect of that transcends outside this time-space reality we live in, and it goes out into other dimensions and it interrupts the fabric of space. So I could sort of see from a galactic perspective how they could be a little worried about that, like us, having a nuclear war and melting down half the galaxy or causing a lot of damage, peripheral damage galactically outside of this planet. So that certainly would make sense that they're concerned about it.
Sure. Yeah. It does make sense. It's an interesting hypothesis as to why they might be interested in, atomic warfare assets. There's also, of course, the historical record in terms of, detonating atomic warheads in the atmosphere into, as a test for anti-ballistic missile technology and potentially bringing down some of these UAP
Well,
on accident, not on purpose, but they detonate an atomic warhead in the atmosphere, and all of a sudden one falls out of the sky, and they got to go retrieve it.
I think that when you look at crash retrieval and crashes, I think, there's a lot coming out now where back in say in the Truman administration, I think that some of the crashes that occurred, and it was going on when I researched my book, the first record I could find of someone talking about a UAP was General MacArthur. And
Hmm.
basically he had written a letter to someone and it said that they had recovered there was a crash, they recovered the wreckage, and the wreckage and the biological entities were non-human, they
Hmm.
were extraterrestrial in origin. And so I think what might have happened is back in the day when the World War II era, where they had this anti-aircraft radar, if you will, and they had it turned up real hot because they didn't want to have another Pearl Harbor type incident happen to them. And it seems like that the saucer type crafts would fly into that radar and it would disable their propulsion and cause them to crash. So I think some of the early crashes were probably caused by accident just from the type of radar we're using. But now I'm hearing more and more about how they're deliberately shooting these things down. And, we talk about the psionic assets, if you will, and they actually use people to lure them in and then use some kind of energy weapons to shoot them down, which is something that, even 5 years ago, I wasn't really hearing that, but it seems to be coming out that that's really happening now, which is a little interesting, a little scary and interesting.
Yeah. Well, certainly could be, radar in the early days. Um, stories of these things being essentially sort of left with the engine running and the door open. There's the case I think that Ross Coulthart talked about in his book In Plain Sight. There was, a craft that, allegedly left, just, like I said, with the lights on and the motor
It's
running,
like
and
leaving somebody a new car with the door open and the keys in it.
it's bizarre. But there's probably numerous explanations, and of course, like you said, the use of directed energy weapons of some sort to bring these things down is also somewhat relatively new the last several years.
Yeah, right.
Of
At least
course,
we're hearing about it now. Yeah.
right, and of course the psionics. I think that's been long discussed about people being able to, communicate telepathically with
Oh, yeah.
a non-human intelligence, but um, relatively more new that we're talking about potentially communicating with the craft itself,
Yep.
or potentially occupants. But it seems that from what Jake Barber and others were talking about here, that it might be more of a communication with the craft itself,
Exactly.
which is of course extraordinarily interesting. And it does remind me of English Swan in his book Penetration. And one of the things he talked about with regards to why the government wants to keep this secret, the NHI presence, is because if people found out that they could communicate on their own telepathically with the NHI, then it diminishes the government's, sovereignty and power over the people.
Absolutely. Yeah, and I think that's probably one of the things that's probably on it's, human consciousness is going to go up to the next level when this starts, the connection starts getting better with non-human intelligence, that's for sure.
Yeah.
Interesting though, very interesting. I think one of the things that that's caught my interest is the financial community. The Wall Street guys are starting to get interested in this. Last year at the SALT conference, Colonel Nell, he was the last person to speak. And the SALT conference is like a really elite group of Wall Streeters that get together. I think somebody told me it costs $1,500 for a seat there. But the last speaker was Colonel Nell, and I mean, he just laid it out as blatantly as it could be about non-human intelligence, how it's real, and the government's known about it and all that. And it's, of course, some stuff that we all know, you and I know, but you're not used to hearing people with his credibility going on a live video and coming out and saying it that blatantly. So that's a
Yeah.
that's a good thing. And then there was apparently David Gresh had been in a meeting in um, somewhere in New York, a Wall Street meeting, and he goes in there and takes a picture of a craft. It's like a saucer craft, and he told him it's 40 feet across. And then he's talking about when you go in it, it's like stepping inside a football stadium.
Mhm.
And then how the power source was, like a terawatt, which is enough to power hundreds of homes. So when you start talking to the Wall Street guys about this kind of stuff, they're going to start, paying attention and figuring out a way to make some money on it for sure.
Oh, for sure. I mean, there's definitely some hedge funds that have started to move into the sphere, Silicon Valley,
Yep.
tech people, AI. Um, you know, look, part of it is the technology, but a big component is for a new energy source. And
Yeah.
whoever is able to come up with that, is
They're going to make huge money on it, right?
a lot
Yeah.
of money.
Yeah,
And then
right,
there's,
right.
material sciences and all kinds of other aspects to this that, now that people are finally coming around to the realization that, you know, uh, UFOs are no longer the realm of the tin hat crowd.
Right.
It's now
The Wall Street
UAP,
guys. Yeah,
and
right.
it's the people with the deep pockets.
Yeah.
And they're all, finally starting to realize that it's true, and they want in on it, and they've been cut out for decades because that technology and the math and the physics involved have been given over to, select number of defense contractors, specifically in the aerospace domain. And now you're having, Silicon Valley saying, where's our piece of the pie?
Well, what do you think? I know that in Washington right now, there's a lot of turmoil because of all the changes with the new administration. It's probably taken some attention off of the UAP stuff. But what do you think? Where do you think we're going with this in the next 6 months or a year?
Well, I think to some respects, you're right. I mean, when Trump has come in here now, he's been in office for approximately 30 days. Today's the 20th. So, his first month in office, there's a significant amount of whiplash going on
Right.
between, government layoffs and, Ukraine, and various things. So, it is easy to think that, the onus has been taken off of UAP and disclosure efforts. But with the recent stand-up of the task force at the House Oversight Committee, to be led by Luna, the task force on the declassification of federal secrets,
Yeah,
is a positive step forward. It does
absolutely.
remain to be seen exactly how that's going to work in terms of staffing, resources, allocations, and whether or not there's going to be some Title 10 and Title 50 clearances provided to, investigators, what sort of access they're going to be given. So it remains to be seen, but it is a positive step forward. I think Luna is going to have her first hearing. It's going to be about JFK, but they're going to, move down the line here with the other assassinations and eventually get to the UAP subject. Meetings continue to happen, behind the scenes. Not that they're secret, but if I go up to Capitol Hill and I have a meeting, it's going on sort of behind the scenes. It's not in public view. So, there's a lot of those types of things going on. There are other organizations out there that are working on, very similar things in terms of the disclosure and advocating for legislation like the UAP Disclosure Act or whistleblower protection legislation. You have the Americans for Safe Aerospace, Commander Ryan Graves' organization, pushing legislation that would provide greater protections to airline pilots to report, sightings
Yep.
of UAP to the FAA and things. So there's lots of
And
different,
it's now illegal to like retaliate against them.
right.
It
So
used
I
to
mean,
be when you were an airline pilot, they put you on suspension, but now it's a federal offense to do that if somebody reports one.
right. So I mean, there are lots of different things going on. It's just not always, in your face and visible and public. And there are more and more members of Congress getting interested and involved in this. There's a couple new members on the House Oversight that are taking on greater roles. You have Rep. Timmons, I think, is going to be doing military and foreign affairs. I think he has an interest in, UAP and drones and things. You have two members on House Oversight that had not really previously engaged in the UAP topic that are now going to be on this task force on the Republican side. I don't think the Democrats have named their task force members yet, but we'll see who those people are, and
The key is
so
bipartisanship makes a huge difference. I think that's
that's
really
right.
important. Yeah.
Yeah, and fortunately, I mean the issue has been very bipartisan, up to this point. Hopefully it remains that way. I mean, in the
Yeah.
Senate, you had Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer partnering with conservative Republicans in
Yeah.
Mike Rounds and Marco Rubio and
Yeah.
others, putting forward this legislation. And we had in the Grush hearing in July 2023, we had uh, Rep. Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, in the same hearing room, talking about the same thing without any sort of controversy with, other members like Nancy Mace and others who, these are people that don't necessarily always get along, and they certainly don't see eye to eye on most other political issues. But, for that 2 hour time span,
That
they're
was
on
an
the same
interesting
team.
interview. I watched her when she did her examination. Or the other thing I was going to say, you talked about the UAP Disclosure Fund. We just did a podcast a few weeks ago that was geared towards police and law enforcement
Mhm.
responders. And as you know, my last book was basically a guide for police and first responders. And the reason that really what motivated me to write that is my good friend Dr. Keith Taylor
Yeah.
had done a survey, and uh, he had sent out a survey to like 300 of the biggest law enforcement agencies in the country and asked them questions like, what kind of training do you provide for your personnel as far as UAP events might, and what kind of equipment might you have and that kind of thing, any SOPs about UFOs, UAPs. And basically 300 of them the ones that responded back said, we don't have anything, we don't do anything. It was totally, none. And so, I think that what's going on now, particularly with the drone thing, with the UAP Disclosure Fund, we did a podcast and we were talking about um, the police training. And with the drone, I think with as far as law enforcement is concerned, this whole thing with the drones has really pulled them into a quandrum that they're really not prepared to deal with.
Mhm.
So that as times go on, I think there's going to be more and more of a push to train police officers too about this whole thing, because literally, I've spent my time in law enforcement both on the federal and the state level, and there was never any one word about a UFO or UAP in any of that training I ever did. And
Right.
and now you see some of these areas where there was an interview up in New York, And they're kind of like, hey, we had to close our airport down all day because these drones are swarming. What are you guys doing about it, kind of thing? You know what I'm saying? That's another area that really needs some work and some training, that I think that's going to develop soon too.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, look, as this becomes more well known that, this is a reality, we're gonna find all kinds of different ways that we're gonna have to, uh, find ways to deal with it. That goes back to part of our earlier discussion about, figuring out what the ramifications are so we can plan for them. And one of the ramifications, of course, is, the first responders, that they're the first ones on the scene.
Exactly.
They're the first ones that get the call of, hey, there's a drone hovering over my house. Come check it out. They're going to be the first. That's why they're called first responders, of course. They're the first ones on the scene to respond to, the public, and they're the ones that are going to have to deal with this. So we're probably going to find, as we go deeper into this, that there are, lots of different ways we're going to have to train people and educate people, not just about this reality, but how to deal with it, especially when
Exactly.
it comes to the public.
Well, listen, this has been really cool talking to you today. I want
Likewise.
to the slide up on the screen has your address for your website. And is there any way that you want people to contact you or get in touch with you or
Well, you can contact me through the website. You can also find me on, X and LinkedIn and things.
cool?
My company has its own LinkedIn page. You can find me on X. Go to the website, solveadvocacy.com. You can also go to, newparadigminstitute.org. There's lots of different things you can do there to, make your voice heard. We have a lot of call to action or CTAs in which, you can write send an email to your member of Congress and your
Awesome.
two
Yeah,
U.S. senators, and send them a message about wanting more public hearings, wanting to pass the UAPDA, wanting greater whistleblower protection legislation. Any number of things you can do. You also join the New Paradigm Institute's Citizens for Disclosure project, which is really building a grassroots organization across the country, and eventually get to the point where we're going to have a presence in all 50 states and hopefully all 435 congressional districts.
when someone joins what's involved in that?
Well, initially, you sign up to become a member, and then someone from New Paradigm Institute will reach out and talk about what sort of time and energy you have to commit to to the grassroots organizing, and whether that's you just want to be a member of it and participate when you can, or if you want to be a local chapter leader, if you already have grassroots organizing experience, whether you think that you can host an educational event at a local library, or you want to, set up a table at, your local fair or something, and educate the public about, the issue, or, there's any number of ways that people can get involved. And it's not, limited to, simply sitting on the sidelines and getting an email. You can make the most of it. So you can, become a state leader if you want to.
That's great.
So.
Yeah, cool. Well, thanks again so much for taking the time to be with me, and I'm sure that we'll be talking again soon.
Sure,
So,
Richard. Yeah, thank you.
yep, thank you. Please check out our website at AEROPS.site. You'll be able to find current posts, new information, and a list of advisory board members. Don't forget to like and subscribe to our YouTube channel.